Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Val and welcome to day 4 of our 200 days of Psalms. Today's Psalm is actually Psalms chapter 4, which talks about how David found peace and safety in God because of his faithfulness. And so yeah, let's get into it. We see that in the beginning of these Psalms, David starts out by crying out to God that hear me, O God, because he wanted to seek attention from God, and he knew that he was actually calling out to a God who would consider him as righteous, that every time that he would call unto God, God would hear him. After David sought attention from heaven, he continued to acknowledge that God had shown him mercy previously, and he was like, I need you to show me mercy now, and I know you can do it. And he was just tired of these people who kept shaming him and turning him down because they turned his glory into shame. And he was like, for how long will you people turn my glory into shame? David also knew that God sets apart godly people for himself, and he was just seeking with God that he would set him apart. And we saw that David, despite his sinful nature, God really set him apart. Like, he was a very not normal person. Like, he wasn't casual with God. He knew his God. And because of the way David knew God, he kept reminding himself not to sin, that he would meditate on the word of God, that he would avoid to sin, because sometimes sin prevents us from having answered prayers. Sometimes also having unbelief prevents us from having answered prayer. And because his cry here was that God, you would hear me, he didn't want to have sin that would prevent God from hearing his prayers. Despite David knowing that God would hear him every time he would call out, he knew that there's something more to you need to put something in your prayer. You need to accompany something with your prayer, because he offered a sacrifice, because he knew God was actually a covenant keeping God. And despite him trusting God, he needed an accompaniment with his trust, which was a sacrifice. So David offered a sacrifice to God as he kept trusting in God. We also need to get to a point where we recognize God as a covenant keeping God, where we establish covenants with him that he can never break. And whatever that means to you, a covenant can be a sacrifice. You can offer yourself, you can offer whatever agreement you get. It's just an agreement you get with God. And we see in verse 7, David telling God that you have put gladness in my heart despite the season of distress, that even in a season that he was prospering in, he was just okay. He didn't have the gladness that he had in this current season that he was just in distress. And so God really has the ability to make our tough seasons. He has the ability to make us glad, to make us glad, to give us joy, not happiness, to give us joy even in our tough seasons, in our seasons where we are in distress. It's actually very easy to be happy when everything is going well, but what about these tough seasons when they come? It's not up until God gives you gladness, until God gives you joy. And we saw that with David. He knew that his safety was only in God alone, and it is God who made him glad in one of his toughest seasons. And just to sum it up, in conclusion, I would just say that really God hears us when we cry unto him, but there are things that hinders us from experiencing answered prayers, and this can be our sinful nature and actually also our unbelief. And the other thing is that God is a covenant keeping God. Despite us believing and trusting in him, we have to establish covenants with him for longevity. Yeah. God has the ability to make our hearts glad even in tougher seasons, and he has the ability to also give us sleep and rest in seasons where we are in distress, because we actually trust him. And we saw that with David, and that's all I had for Psalms 4. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow, and bye.